Professional.com. Today I'm here with a special guest. This is Dr. Aron McConnell, former colleague of mine, friend of mine, other physical therapist. Worked at Christianity Care currently, also owner of Movement Evolved LLC. So today we're going to go over another movement practice that is becoming more familiar, and it's certainly an ancient enough practice, but you're starting to see it now in more gyms, and we talked about it a little bit more. It's Indian club swinging. So Aron introduced me to this a little while back. I've been using it with my clients and loving it, using it with my own movement practice. But this guy's really got the technique down, and so I want him to kind of take it away from here and go over some of the movements that you use with your clients, and really just touch upon the positions, the technique that are involved in it, because it can look pretty challenging and complex if you just watch people do it. But if you break it down, it's really something that anyone can work on.
Great. I was introduced to Indian club swinging by Brett Jones, and that was through Functional Movement Systems, and also Dr. Ed Thomas, and he's kind of like the guru of gurus when it comes to historical physical art forms and that sort of thing, and he introduced us to Indian clubs inside of the course. And I've kind of bought more, taken them from there, used them inside of training and physical therapy combined. I found them just really, really useful for restoring some of just the natural movements that you can engage in inside of the shoulder that we tend to get out of a lot, because a lot of times just daily life is in front of us, so we all end up collapsed forward, we lose our postural form, and that forces us to lose a lot of our shoulder mobility. We also kind of get stuck in not having that awareness of what it's like to be in full overhead position or bringing through the range that we need for the shoulder just to function normally, and that's where I found Indian clubs can be really helpful. And I introduced him to Chris because I knew that he would latch on to him right away, and clearly he has. And I think that we're going to go over today just kind of some of the basic stuff you can do inside of club swinging. And it really doesn't matter what kind of clubs you use. I mean, we have the wooden clubs that are this way that are weighted. These specific ones are plastic, and then they also have some of the heavier ones that are metal, and I've seen them upwards of 50, 60, 70 pounds. You got swinging a little different by comparison. Today what we're going to be starting with is mainly just lighter weight swinging, going through the motion that's required for this, but we want to break it down. So I mean, without being broken down, it kind of looks a little complicated to go through, especially at high pace. But when broken down, that's actually where you can really get a feel for what your shoulder is doing, what the elbow, the wrist, the hand, and also your postural awareness is going through. So one of the things you always want to start with is your grip. So where do you want to be with your grip? You want to have the ball at the end, your ring finger is just above that, so your pinky is right around the middle of the ball. Neutral grips, you want flat knuckles across the top. You want your wrist to be flat as well. And where you start from is home. So home is right here in front of the shoulder. The forearms vertical, shoulder blades pulled gently back and down. Club is parallel to the ground, okay? And so we went through a couple of different patterns when I first learned this, and there's far more beyond that within fancier club swinging, but we're going to kind of cover the basics at the moment. So from here, for pattern one, what you want to try to do is you want to bring the elbow in. So you're going to kind of almost draw a small circle, half circle right through here. So as the elbow comes in, the club then drops down, the elbow circles around, and you end up with that drawback of the shoulder blade. So your hand should be pretty much next to your head. You don't want to necessarily have it all the way behind, because especially when you do two club swinging, it gets a little more complicated. So what you're going to be doing with two club swinging, you kind of want to mimic it with one. So once you stop here, you can kind of just tap your thumb knuckle against the side of your head. The movement that you go through then is what's called cast. So then you cast out, straighten the elbow, and then you drop the club into those fingers. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want the wrist to drop. You want the wrist to maintain neutral. You just open the fingers from there, okay? And then you let the club comfortably fall down. As it hits here, you pull back to that home position, that nice neutral grip, okay? And so that's the first pattern, and we're going to go through it a couple more times, kind of pull out some other key points that you can go through. So again, when you draw the elbow across, what you don't want to do, you don't want to rotate the torso. You're not sure, this isn't torso rotation, it's all for the shoulder. So if you don't have great external rotation of the shoulder, you might get a little, can't come any further, but that's okay. It's the you don't have to be perfect with this, so yours might be here, whereas mine's a little farther around, okay? So don't try and overdo it from the torso, just wherever your shoulder's able to go, that's the amount of control you have. So as you bring it around, usually right around here as the club is coming behind you, double check your wrist. So look up at it, do you still have that neutral wrist? A lot of times what ends up happening from this position is that people come up and they want to really drop it behind them, so they end up in this wrist extended position, and that's where you lose a lot of the grip strength that you have, and it also throws off your form. So you always want to make sure that wrist stays neutral throughout that whole rotational position around, and then as you come back, you want to think about sinking that shoulder blade back and down. So you're staying inside of this plane rather than letting the elbow stay in front. Okay, so then from there, that cast out, again, watch the wrist. From here, when you come down, what a lot of people want to do is they want to come down and they want to turn in because they're trying to get back to the home position. But what that does is when you turn that shoulder in, saw my shoulder kick forward, you lose the shoulder blade and the trunk's going to want to rotate with you. So always make sure that when you're here, when you come down, just let it drop, stay open from that externally rotated position of the shoulder. Come down to here, and naturally you'll just swing right back to home. Okay, so more like your elbow connects to your side, forearm and the elbow do the rest back to that neutral position. And so as you go through that, just initially, this is the important part. And this is kind of where I've taught a lot of patients and clients that this is where they need to start just to kind of get control of the shoulder blade. And I know that Chris has also used this as well, because you don't necessarily need to break out into the whole pattern if the person's got a little trouble with this. Because a lot of times this is where we lose our control from, is from the shoulder blade.
You can see a huge difference between the mobility on my shoulder than Aaron's, so like he was talking about. I can't make it look as pretty as he can. I don't have that type of mobility. Doesn't mean that you don't work towards it, where you feel your blockages and try to come up and go through as much of the movement as you can, because it will work your mobility as you're practicing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point where you tend to lose the trunk is that as you get up to here, when you're coming back, we want to rotate with it. So that shoulder blade can't go back if you've got tight pecs, tight lats. You don't have that really drop back and down position on the shoulder blade. You end up here. If you try and rotate through, and now you've lost your trunk, and then you're swinging back here, and you're going to come down into your leg when you try and bring it around. Or you end up kind of doing one of these twists from the trunk, and you lose a lot of motion that you can gain from the shoulder. One of the ways that you can kind of do that is work on setting yourself in pelvic neutral. Once you kind of come back to home, what you want to try and do is draw the pelvis up. So you're kind of going away from this anterior pelvic tilt position, and you want to correct for that. But what you want to try and do, once you restore that position, shut off the glutes. So a lot of times people want to tuck their hips underneath them. That's not so much the trunk. I can still twist through that. Instead, I try and draw my stomach in. It's that gymnast hollow that you can get from the trunk. Now it's hard for me to twist, and I'm going to kind of keep that in place as I move through the motion, trying to maintain my trunk without rotating. One of the things you want to watch where this hand is, because this is not going to be pretty. So this hand you can keep at your side. One of the things you do with two-handed clubs, just take it here, and you put that totally out of the way, so you're not having to worry about it. You don't come in contact with it there. Okay? So the second pattern, and this is where pretty much most of the other patterns stem from, is pattern number 1, which is the first one I just showed you, and pattern number 2 is the second one. Pattern number 2 is the exact reverse. So you start from home again, forearms vertical, double check the wrist. Is the wrist flat? Knuckles flat across the top, nice, comfortable. Doesn't have to try and murder and crush the club. You just want to keep a firm grip on it. So from here, rather than going first with the elbow, we're going to go in the opposite direction. So the first thing you do is cast. But again, watch the wrist. So your fingers should be in line all the way down. You don't want to drop off the wrist. Because you drop off the wrist, now you're going to lose control of the club. And swinging one of these, especially when you get done with the heavier ones, you're going to put holes in the wall. So you cast, you open up the first 2 fingers, and then the club comes down and comes back up to this position. Seem familiar? Okay. And then you catch. So right here is that kind of same point where in pattern 1 we would transition, we would cast out. This time instead we're coming back into that neutral wrist position again. Check your wrists and your knuckles. It should be in neutral, shouldn't be flat, shouldn't be extended. Keep it right here now. What I like to call this one is you put the sword away. So you're just dropping it back down to that same position. So your hand is right next to your head, and you're trying to just comfortably drop it behind you. If you're way over here, that drop behind is going to be weird. So you want to try and stay within this plane of motion as the club drops back. And then from here, you just do the opposite circle. So that elbow comes back down and around and back to home. Okay? This one's a little bit trickier for bringing it back to home by comparison to the other one. Pattern number one flows really well right back to home, whereas pattern number two comes across, you catch, put the sword away, and when you're coming back down, you gotta set it a little bit coming back to home. You're going really fast, and you're gonna skip that part. But when you're trying to learn the motion, you really want to come through the pattern. Coming out of the cast, watch the wrist, mine just dropped. Coming around, and you catch. Pull the sword away, drill the elbow down, and you come back to that neutral position. Check your trunk. The same points of rotation still exist for pattern number two, and then you can get fancy with different patterns. Did you want me to go through any of the double-sided patterns?
Yeah, I mean, well, you don't have to break those down as much,
Okay.
but just I think it's good to see where you can go with this. I think that's, for most people, going to be a good stopping point for practice, and just seeing how it's just a bunch of positions and transitions. Just like, we do a lot of kettlebell work, where one of the things I like about the clubs is similar to kettlebells, you kind of have to let yourself go at certain points with it.
Absolutely.
And kind of against gravity, you're not trying to, on the downswing. Part of being able to do that for longer periods of time is not being too rigid throughout the whole movement, and that's how the body needs to work. Sometimes we need to be tight, sometimes we need to be loose, and you really learn that well with this.
Absolutely. And the same thing applies. This is a 3-pound club. It doesn't feel like a 3-pound. I remember I handed this to my manager at one point. He asked me if it was 10 to 12. So it's 18 inches long. So you figure that 3-pound weight is on the end here. It's not in the handle. So in which case, that 3-pound weight out here is a lot on the shoulders. You're not going to want to try and slowly do it in that position. Instead, you're going to just let the club do the work, and it swings through, and I'm just controlling it. Similar to the kettlebell swings, that the gravity brings the kettlebell down, and you snap the hips to bring it back up, but it kind of floats up at the top, and there's that 0 point. Same thing exists here, is that gravity takes it around, and it's that 0 point where I can kind of catch it and control it when I go through either one of the patterns. It's coming through. So one other thing I was thinking of, rather than the double-sided patterns to work on, is more the front to back patterns that you can go for. So you don't always have to be inside of this plane of swing. You can also do front to back. Same neutral wrist position. The difference is you're going to be, so again, set that trunk in neutral, and you're going to be coming back through here. As it comes down, you kind of let the grip out a little bit as it comes behind you. Otherwise, this is an awkward position for the arm and the shoulder. And just swinging front to back. So one of the things that this does, as this comes back, it wants to pitch my body forward. So I have to use my trunk muscles to maintain position as it comes back. And then as it comes overhead, it wants to tip me back. Again, if I maintain that position, now my shoulder's trying to open up in that position. And you can do this with one club, so you can do it with two, and do the same pattern. Okay, now I've got double the force on my trunk trying to maintain. Or I can do alternating patterns with this. So now when I come here, my body wants to rotate through that pattern, and this is like anti-rotation stability to be able to maintain my trunk position. This is where I found it most useful in the beginning for especially balanced patients who have a lot of trouble engaging their trunk.
Very cool. Yeah, and I've been using this a lot more, like, mine actually from my own practice, just noticing, like, my shoulders want to always tip forward. The more heavy lifting that I find myself doing, the more shoulders want to come forward. So it's a great balance for a lot of heavy lifting because it loosens things up the more you go, and it actually builds endurance. And, as we both know, that's really what you need in the stabilizing muscles of the shoulder blade and the core. So the whole time that you're moving the arms, you're also, as Aaron was talking about, you're maintaining stabilization. So it's a phenomenal form of dynamic stability and mobility, shoulder mobility and stability, as well as that midline stabilization. Anything else you got to add?
No, I think it's a great place for people to be able to start with the club swinging. Remember, you want to start light, don't go crazy heavy, because they got all sorts of clubs out there. You pick up a 25-pounder, you're going to probably hurt yourself. 1 pound will be more than enough. First day I did this, We did a couple hours of just 1 pound swing, and my traps have never been so sore. So I just want to start light and learn the patterns first and own the movement before you even bother worrying about how much weight that you